Hey, what's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. Subscribe to Saturday Down South on YouTube. I am Connor O'Gara. Will, we have a college football playoff field, and oh my goodness gracious, Miami's in. Bama's in. What? I said what? Like 3 different times during the selection show. They finally gave us a suspenseful selection Sunday. Cheers. Never thought we'd get it, but somehow, by the grace of the college football gods, we got it.
You know, Connor, I woke up like plenty of people in America ready for a championship series to be decided at 7 a.m. Of course, I'm talking about, would Max Verstappen win the Drivers' Championship over Lando Norris? Of course, he did not.
I had no idea what you were talking about when you started that. I was like, where is Will going? Did he just say championship series? That's just a Louisiana thing we're doing now? Like bowl championship
well, yeah, the
series?
bowl championship. Jeff Landry, as you know, is competing for that. No, they actually decided the F1 series or season at like 7 a.m. Central this morning. So I woke up, watched that, went back to sleep, woke up for the playoff rating show. Insane Sunday. And it's the joke we've been telling all year that, you know, this meeting could kind of be an email. I've never felt so vindicated by this take because they completely threw out everything they said and all those arguments everybody had all year from watching a television WWE special didn't matter when the rubber met the road.
So we were recording this later than usual. Apologies if you hear Claire in the background. They are currently making Christmas cookies. I promise it is adorable reasons why a 2.5-year-old is just showing up in your ears at random points. So apologies if you hear that. We are doing this later than usual because we waited for the rankings show. If you did not see what those rankings looked like for whatever reason, here's how it played out on Selection Sunday with your Indiana Hoosiers as the number 1 team in America. My goodness, we'll get to some thoughts on that a little bit later. Ohio State at 2, Georgia at 3, Texas Tech 4, Oregon 5, Ole Miss 6, Texas A&M at 7, Oklahoma 8, wait for it, Alabama at 9, and Miami at 10, Tulane at 11, and James Madison at 12. That's just actually the seedings and how it's going to play out. I realize the final rankings look different because of, you know, group of 5, automatic bid, 5-loss, Duke wins the ACC championship. You get what I'm saying? That's what it looks like. And Will, should we start with, we're going to get to the Alabama SEC championship showing and everything related to it. It kind of bleeds into it with some of our playoff talk. But the biggest surprise to me was exactly what you brought up. The fact that Miami moved ahead of Notre Dame and that it took this long for it to happen, something I didn't think that they would ultimately end up doing, something that I kind of made fun of Booger McFarland for even suggesting in the first place. And it happened. The selection committee decided, you know what? I know we got these 3 teams that we're debating after BYU loses in the Big 12 championship. I know we're debating between Alabama and Notre Dame and Miami, but guys, hear me out. What if Saturday just didn't matter? And what if also, because of the precedent we set last year, that's why Saturday did matter for Alabama or didn't hurt them. What if we also just decided we messed up the first ranking, Miami side by side, because BYU's out of the picture, side by side with Notre Dame, you're in the field. I'm pretty stunned. I'm pretty stunned that the selection committee did this. But as a Saints fan, you know this. When you just see a call so blatantly incorrect on the field, all you want is to get it right. And they did, at least for those 2 teams, it felt like they got it right.
Yeah, exactly. You know, a good allegory to this is, first off, let me just take a pause. You watched Indiana, Ohio State, right?
Yes, I have a story as to why the majority of the second half of that game I was unable to watch. We will get to that because I had a whale of a day on Saturday with some logistical issues, and we will get to why I was held up and unable to be fully locked in on that. I'm going to watch a replay at some point later today, just because I want to use it for Heisman stuff as well. But I was able to only follow along bits and pieces because of my nightmare hotel logistics that I was left figuring out at 11 o'clock.
Oh, heck yeah. I love it when that happens. But yeah, man, in the back end of that game, it kind of felt like the little bit of the Ohio State special, very physical game. Don't get me wrong, but it was like, okay, refs are kind of swallowing the whistle of Ohio State. And you see this call come through that's like an illegal blocking play flag on the defense. And, you know, being my boys like, oh, of course, on Indiana. And then you go back and you look at it, like, that guy kind of rolled into that offensive lineman's knee on purpose. It's like, that was the right call. As annoying as it sounded at the time that Ohio State was going to free, first out, it's like, okay, exactly the same thing here. It's like, we could go back and forth, And Heather Dinich was explaining this morning, and she said, well, technically they followed the protocols that are listed out in the process, which is that when these two teams are next to each other, that's when head-to-head matters. And I would counter by saying, my brothers in Christ, my brothers and sisters in Christ, and the playoff committee, who put them next to each other? You guys made up the ranking and then said they weren't near each other, so it wouldn't matter.
We're all trying to figure out who did this. We really are. And this is going to happen. We're not going to have Tuesday ranking shows anymore. We're not going to have Tuesday ranking shows. I don't know if we will have a Tuesday poll. I would kind of rather we didn't. Can you imagine how much our minds and our takes would just go wild if we didn't have these Tuesday rankings, and if we were instead just go? Now, there is a danger in that. We could still maybe come out with a poll, but just have no transparency whatsoever. There is a danger with morphing our opinions to what the AP does. And I do feel like the college football playoff selection committee does that at times. And I think it works like that vice versa. So I'm not necessarily sitting here in favor of saying I want the AP to have that much influence and for us to think that that is how we're programmed to think. But at the same time, the way that this is all played out with Miami and Notre Dame being ranked ahead of Miami at every single ranking, and then having virtually no difference in that result, right? Because this result happened all the way back in August. It happened in week 1. Or I guess September 1st, technically. No, I think it happened August 31st. But none of that had changed. And Miami's common opponents had gotten better with Miami and Notre Dame. And, they had the advantage like 3 or 4 common opponents. So all of this had played out. And the selection committee ultimately had to look at this and say, guys, I think we just messed up the first ranking. I really do think that they thought that. And they banked on a Miami loss. They never got it. And now Notre Dame is rightfully upset. It's rightfully upset. And Miami fans were upset this entire time. And now they're the ones that are sitting there like, thanks. You did it right. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I think you hit on it exactly, which is how often do we see someone in power literally go, I was wrong. And it took them weeks, but we're glad they got there because they got there. And at the end of the day, we could hear different SEC coaches complaining about, oh, we don't want to schedule out a conference, like for Steve Sarkisian, like we've talked about all year or whatever. But you can't then make the wins not matter. Like, it's one thing to make the losses not matter. Okay, we shouldn't have scheduled that game because we lost it, but we shouldn't have scheduled that game because we won it and it didn't matter. It's just not a thought that we'd ever had as a college football viewing public. So, and again, banking on a Miami Hurricanes late season collapse is the surest money in sports. So, of course, the funniest thing possible always happens in Miami, which is, of course, they got it together at the end of the season. Of course, all these weeks of rankings didn't matter. And of course, they just cruised into the playoff.
Do you think that Duke winning the ACC championship and pushing out the likely scenario in which the ACC champ was going to get into the field by beating Virginia, do you think that impacted the Miami ranking? Because we're going to talk about the Alabama side in a second here and all the financial ramifications of saying there's no penalty for losing in the SEC championship and having this as a data point. We're going to get to that side in a second here. So I feel like if we're going to bring up that point, we have to address this one of this was designed to make sure that those power conference commissioners are having at least one seat at the table. And if the ACC was going to be left out entirely while 2 group of 5 teams get in, I think Jim Phillips would have, walked to Texas to confront the selection committee. I think he would have been scorched earth. And while I typically do not defend that type of behavior, I think it would have made them just intolerable. I think it would have been so bad to listen to that standpoint. So in a way, I almost do feel like if the selection committee decided by leaving out an independent like Notre Dame is the path of least resistance, even if the path to get there was parkour in the beginning of that Office episode, as long as point A is delusion and point B is the hospital, they got there.
Plenty of teams have seasons like that. Yes, I totally agree. But Bernie Mac was like, I don't condone this type of behavior, but I understand. Exactly the same thing, right? Where you have a conference that all year, even like a Georgia Tech was seen as a playoff team all season. And then you have all this weird stuff happens with the non-conference conference loss that Virginia took. You have like all this stuff happens. And I think it's twofold how that Duke win benefited Miami, right? Because I think it also opened the door for more chaos, right? Because there were all these stakeholders that were involved where, oh, if you view this team this way, you have to view this team this way. And I think Duke winning that conference, and how thankful are we that the AQs are gone? Because man,
we would have a group of 5 team getting an automatic bid instead or getting a first round bye instead of Ohio State. That would make no sense whatsoever. Can you imagine if Tulane with 2 losses got a first round bye instead of Ohio State, who just suffered its first loss of the year playing in a 1-2 matchup that was decided 13-10? I actually think that sometimes we're a little bit too reactionary with these things. I think that's going to age just fine. I think that's going to be okay. There's no way in which Tulane.
They're going, all right, look, this playoff appearance thing was cute, but you got to get to work. All right, like you're on PTO for like 3 weeks. You can't be prepping your team for this whole like bye week. So yeah, I'm actually so glad that this is the year that we don't have the AQ though, exactly for that reason. Where it's like, hey, like I feel like this field is really deep, and I've said over and over again, I'm not going to feel sorry for teams specifically, 2 and 3 loss teams that have had all these opportunities to get in, but. I don't know. I'm just fired up about the field. I think that, and one more point really quickly about Notre Dame, which is that, you could make the point about, they shouldn't have scheduled these hard teams, right? But in previous years, who did they schedule? Marshall and IU.
Notre Dame can't predict that. Notre Dame can't predict that. They make this schedule so far out in advance. They make it with a certain number of power conference teams in mind. They make it with a certain number of neutral site games played against service academies at baseball fields. They do all these things that they try and check these boxes with this rivalry, with that rivalry. And they're not looking at this from a year-to-year standpoint. This is entirely different than college basketball. So they can't really change that even if they wanted to, unless, you join a conference. Just saying. I don't feel bad. I don't feel bad for Notre Dame not getting in. I agree with you. The field was really, really stacked in terms of like the amount of 10-2 and 11-1 teams that were left to figure out what this was going to look like. And so, yeah, there was going to be a couple of those teams on the outside looking in. I would rather still see Vandy than Notre Dame. Sorry. Notre Dame played really well down the stretch. Notre Dame also had a very favorable schedule down the stretch, and they lost to the 2 toughest teams on their schedule. A 10-2 team that loses to the 2 toughest teams in their schedule, the vast majority of the previous history of college football is not sniffing a national championship, especially one that doesn't even get into a conference championship because, oh, by the way, it doesn't have one to play in.
Yeah, and the point I was making there is Notre Dame uniquely can't complain. What if we scheduled easier teams? Because those are the games they've lost historically. Like I said, to NIU and to Marshall and all that. So, next year we're never gonna schedule Miami again. We'll schedule NIU. How'd that go last time? So yeah, I think that again, no sympathy last year. I feel like we're so vindicated for the 3-loss SEC teams that were complaining about not getting in. This year, even better teams getting left out. But I don't think we're missing any contenders.
Right, I agree with that. I agree. There's nobody that's getting left out that I'm looking at going, they could have won a national championship. And the team that got in, Alabama, I'm looking at them going, I don't think they can win a national championship, but I'm also okay with not punishing them for having that 3rd loss come in a conference championship game. And the difference being that Notre Dame and Miami were idle. And I could make the case, while I am so glad that Miami got the head-to-head ultimately against Notre Dame, if I was going to say a negative thing against Miami, it was going to be, you guys just had a 5-loss team win your conference, and you couldn't even get to the conference title game in that league? Come on.
Yep.
So that's why I'll push back a little bit and say none of those 3 teams were sitting there with perfectly flawless resumes, and Alabama ultimately doesn't move down even to 10. When I saw that Ohio State stayed on that 2 line, I said, oh, Bama's in. It's already done. And they went in reverse order. They started at 1 and worked their way up. Bama was good because you can't tell me that Ohio State losing in the Big Ten Championship and then not moving up Georgia, which, by the way, we're going to get to these matchups in a bit. I actually think Georgia kind of lucked out, if we're being honest. But you can't tell me that all of a sudden makes sense and then say, oh, yeah, well, we're going to take Alabama out of the field. And people are making the case, what about BYU? Why did BYU fall out of the field? BYU wasn't in the field going into conference championship weekend. If the selection committee had said, this is our field, these are the 10 at-large teams, BYU wouldn't have been in. So to me, it's a little bit different to drop them for that. At the same time, we're just going to get into the SEC championship stuff with Bama's seeding and how this all played out because it bleeds into it. A lot of the time it's separate, kind of how this plays out. I feel like this is just so related to each other. Are you okay with doing that?
Yes, I totally am, and I think maybe it would be people for a quick note on Vandy, Texas. Just real quick. I probably feel the worst for Vandy of any team, although they did have the two, SEC losses. I think Texas had enough opportunities. The Florida game is an obvious one. I think playing it close to Georgia and it would have helped them a ton. And I think relating that back to your point about BYU, which is that BYU had one team they had to beat. It was Texas Tech. They had one team they had to get close to, and it was Texas Tech. They didn't get close. They had two. Not identical games because the game flow was a little bit different, but they are clearly a significantly worse team than Texas Tech based on two matchups. And so, yeah, it's hard for me to feel sorry for them as well because they had two shots at it. And to your point, it's like, yeah, they were not. People like to leave that out when they talk about BYU with the playoff predictor, where it's 99.9% if they win the Texas Tech game and like 0.2% if they lose. They were not predicted to be in going into that game. It would have taken an upset to get them there.
And Vandy, look, I think it's just easy to connect dots and say that Vandy, and I've said this before, so apologies, but it bears repeating if those are going scorched earth on Vandy not making the playoff. We knew this was going to happen based on how that Tuesday ranking show played out, with them having the irony of destroying Tennessee, then Tennessee falls out of the top 25, and it's the old, hey, what if we just beat them by 7?
Vandy breaks another team. Look at this. Right? They're in distress.
They did. They really did. And I would rather see Vandy in the college football playoff than so many of these other teams. If you're telling me right now that I could watch Vandy as opposed to like 8 of these teams, I would say, yeah, I would agree with that. But at the same time, Vandy picked the wrong year to be 10-2. And that's what, unfortunately, this comes down to. In my opinion, is there probably a small, teeny tiny piece of this that's brand affiliation? Yes. But is it the reason Vandy got left out? No, I don't think that's the case. I can sit here and look at this objectively. Vandy, if your resume stood above all the rest and you were getting a raw deal as a result of your lack of football history, I would be the first person saying this is an injustice. We need to go to bat for this program. And you can tell me that Vandy did a great job breaking all of these teams as we've outlined before. But the fact is, you didn't have those wins age as well as they could. And in a year in which there were so many of those 10-2, 11-1 teams, you got a raw deal. And that stinks. And it stinks also that you weren't going to be ranked ahead of Texas. You weren't going to be ranked ahead of Alabama. Those two teams, they were holding you back. It would have been different if you, as weird as it sounds, it would have been different if you had worse losses. Like if Vandy had lost that game to LSU, instead of losing that game to Bama, we're talking about those teams side by side in a much different way. But that's not how it played out. And unfortunately, Vandy will not ultimately be going to the college football playoff. And Texas not going to the college football playoff means that for the 20th time in the last 21 years, preseason AP number 1 will not win a national championship.
Yeah, as much as things change, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And even with all those opportunities, like I said, I know you're going to keep hearing me say this because a lot of people are feeling sorry for these teams. It's very hard for me to feel sorry for a Texas team that had such an inside track to make the playoffs, started at number 1, had the big brand, all of that, right? And I will say, now that we're looking at the rankings that matter, we can see a little bit of a trend here where I think you're right as far as logo does matter. The fact that Texas, yeah, they had the head-to-head win, right? But Bama being where they were, I don't think was really about logo. I'll be honest with you. I think it was about the precedent set by SMU last year. And it was about what we hit on at the time, those 4 straight wins, ranked wins at the time that they had. And I think another thing that was sneaky that we covered a ton on the podcast was Bama's ability to get the extra possession up, get the insurance score, make the Vandy game feel, when you look back at it, kind of a less close game than it was, right?
Correct.
And that was something that Kalen DeBoer is an artist at, where it comes to, Missouri game notwithstanding, where he can kind of get that extra possession before the half to keep the game at arm's reach, to where when you're looking back a month and a half later, you're going, how was that game close,
So that's interesting because it's the context that many people went into the SEC championship with, of what are style points in this game? Are style points irrelevant? What's the line? I had said beforehand, look, unless this is 35-7, come on. It was instead 28-7, and Georgia wins another SEC
hypothetical, Connor, and from a guy who picked Alabama in this game.
Right?
That could never happen. No, Kirby's just going to do what he's done in these big games over and over and over again against Texas. Now, in this one, and in like a neutral site situation, it's like, yeah, you could see a Kirby team that is engaged, and you could see a Kirby team that is not. And they're just radically different teams. We see it again here.
Georgia wins another SEC championship, dominates Alabama, avenges the loss from earlier in the year, avenges the only loss that Georgia had all year. Kirby gets his first win against Kalen DeBoer. He's 2-7 now against Alabama, and it feels like demons have been exercised in a weird sort of way because of the fact that it happened in Atlanta. Atlanta was the place that Alabama never lost, had not lost a game in Atlanta since 2008 to a certain Tim Tebow.
Since the Bush administration and Timothy Tebow pre-baseball.
Was it? No, that was Obama. Obama had just been elected, not inaugurated yet.
It was incumbent versus IC, President-elect Obama.
Always gets a little bit murky when we're talking about the crossover to administration. Yeah. The ability for Alabama to keep this close was something that was not lost on Kalen DeBoer. Okay. And I knew, so the way that all of this played out, a game in which Alabama was not up to task. I thought Alabama would be the more desperate team. Couldn't have been more wrong on that. Georgia looked like the team that had everything to play for.
They looked desperate in that they looked like they were running from a bear with no tools or clothes on. Like they were desperate. Yeah. It just wasn't good.
Yeah, like lost, like someone tipped over the porta potty and you're like, what in the world just happened?
I'm desperate. I got to get out of here. And Kirby's just beating on the porta potty. Like all your friends and relatives are outside. You're trapped.
Yeah, you got nothing. You're Lars and heavyweights. Oh my God, what in the world is happening to me right now? Panic. That's what Bama looked like. And I knew that after this game played out, and we're not going to, Georgia fans don't hate, we're not going to talk a ton of Georgia because Bama, in my opinion, was more interesting going into this day, just knowing that fate. We're not taking away from the accomplishment. Well, plenty of time to preview what Georgia has become, playoff chances, national championship chances, all of that stuff. We're going to get to that. But Kalen DeBoer in the postgame kind of went back and forth. He kind of went back and forth between pretending like he didn't care about the margin of defeat that his team suffered in this very important game that everybody was watching, that you knew if Alabama lost.
Preeminent margin of defeat understander, as we've just laid out too. Like a guy who has made that a point. Yeah.
Yes. So he kind of went back and forth between, well, that doesn't matter at all, to also just, knowing that with 7.5 minutes left, it was a 28 to 14 game and Bama had the ball. He knew that. He knew that part. And he knew the part where he said, like if we're hypothetically able to get a matchup in 2 weeks, I know we're going to be so much healthier at this spot, that spot, that spot. And they didn't have Jay Miller in this one, which does not explain why you had your worst rushing total since at least 1940 in an organized tackle football game. Okay.
That was the tweet I had at STS is, hey, if you're having a bad day, you had more rushing yards than Alabama today, who finished with -3.
-3. They had one at one point, and then they took a Ty Simpson sack. I think it ended up being like 19 sack-adjusted rushing yards. But so all this is playing out, and you're hearing this, you're like, yeah, I get it. I get why you have to say that, and you don't want to look too thirsty, so that's why you're not making it obvious. You want to present a point of strength, because you want to cover both bases, right? Like Bama presented this front, and I guarantee you this was discussed internally, maybe not among players, but it definitely was, coaches, administration, all that stuff of, all right, we need to make sure that if we do get blown out in this game, we're playing the angles. We know what we're going to say. We know what the things that we're going to do to make this game feel closer than it was. And you could say like, all right, well then, why did Bama punt in this spot? Why didn't they go for it here? Why did they do this there? Bama got dominated in this game in ways that they did not expect to get dominated. And that's what this comes down to. And afterwards, when reality hits in of, oh man, we just lost by 3 touchdowns in a game in which everybody was watching. We had a standalone game, and we're probably going to have to defend ourselves. Bama is, of course, going to present the point of total confidence. You know what? Kalen DeBoer is saying, I don't think this game should have any sort of bearing on our ranking. And in a nutshell, I agree with him more than I don't. But Will, the more I watch this game, the more I got the ick.
That was the question I was going to ask you. Being there, when did it feel over for Alabama?
It felt over when Bama threw that swing pass. I can't remember who it was to. It was either to, I think it was to A.K. Deere, the freshman. Or was it to Daniel Hill? I don't remember. It was to one of their young running backs who was just totally unprepared for that spotlight. And they dropped this pass on 4th and 2 or whatever, and DeBoer loses his mind in ways that I don't see him lose his mind. and he was a more amped up version of himself, which leads me to believe even more so that he knew that there could be actual ramifications for losing the way that Alabama did in this football game. But the more I watched it, and as I'm sitting there in the middle of the fourth quarter, when it's, allegedly 28-14, Bama's got the football, I'm thinking, you know what's on the line here. And you have how many rushing yards? You have one. You have one more than me, who's sitting on my butt eating soft serve in the press box. One? What are we doing here? Why is this Alabama team at this place where it can have this huge get over the hump type game against Auburn, and it looks like, man, exhale, sigh of relief. And then it gets out there in this game and it's soft. That's who Alabama is at this point. It's a soft football team. And the team that isn't soft, you saw what that looks like. That's Georgia. And you saw an Alabama team that was overmatched, and it was Lars tied to the tree in heavyweights.
Yeah, I mean, and that is, I think, did you hear Saban's quote about "Don't give me that bull bleep" on game day?
Oh yeah, about like just what's the real plan?
Yeah, or like what's the key factor here? He's like, "Don't give me that bull bleep about physicality, control the line of scrimmage, running the ball." It's ironic because Kirby's answer to that question was big special teams play I think could happen, and that happened in this game. But all the stuff that Saban would describe as bull bleep physicality, running the football, is why it felt so inevitable by Georgia, where every time Bama made what could be described as a solid play, it was like, all right, no, get up and do it again. You are getting, out physical. And I think it's so interesting because I'm not exactly out on, Brian Grubb, DeBoer as offensive play callers, but I think I'm realizing how much of their game plan is developed on the run, where it comes to, okay, you have to respect the run. It's similar to what we heard Brian Kelly say over and over to start the year, which is, if we're not scared of you running the ball, doesn't matter how good Ty Simpson is. Because Ty Simpson's good. I mean, you could even go back to, that final, I guess you could kind of call it a Hail Mary that hit his receiver in the end zone right in the chest after all that. And you could still see some of that vintage Ty Simpson stuff. But when the Georgia defense is ravenous, when you could see the rabies dripping off of their fangs on the line of scrimmage, dude, and you could see like the star player badges lighting up in Madden, it's like, it doesn't matter. Keep dropping it back. We're going to get beat off the edge. We're going to get interior pressure. We're going to cover guys one-on-one. And then when the ball gets to them, they're going to be so, scared. They're just going to drop the ball because they don't want to see what's coming. And like, even the corners, I feel like Ellis Robinson started with a ton of physicality. Like the way that like everywhere that you could kind of usually hide as a great offensive play caller, which I still think they have in Tuscaloosa, it was just being taken away one by one.
Georgia made all the adjustments. All the adjustments from that first matchup. There was not a third down that had any ounce of confidence. For a long time, it felt like Bama, and this is the growing frustration, is that it's entirely different if you're watching this with a skeptical eye, which Lord knows the vast majority of this viewing audience was with a skeptical eye, because when you are Alabama, you have to also understand that everybody wants to then try and find a way to keep you out. When you're the team that people feel like you always get the breaks, and you got the break in 23 and you got the break in 17. Again, I could push back on some of that stuff. This isn't necessarily the platform to do so. But when you're the team that's been at the top and you feel like, and you've gotten certain breaks at different points, yeah, obviously teams that are on the outside looking in want you to fail. It would have been an entirely different vibe if this was a back and forth 42-35 type game in which Alabama's strengths looked like real strengths that people wanted to see more of. Instead, it was an offense that looked a whole lot more like the Oklahoma team that they're going to face in the first round of the playoff than what Ty Simpson said afterwards, which was the best offense in America. And I about fell out of my chair when I heard him say that. I was like, you? This year? Because you just had -3 rushing yards, and I know that's not going forward. That's not even getting to the line of scrimmage. What are we talking about here? And Bama's only good plays were like ridiculous Ryan Williams running after the catch. Jeremy Bernard gets a nice little pick from the ref, and then he stiff arms Dalen Everett, who had just had a terrible possession when he had the slap that extended the drive that gave Bama its first touchdown of the day. Like those plays felt so random and fluky and not within like the flow of the offense. And I don't really blame people for thinking, yeah, I'm good. I don't need to see more of this Bama team that had 8 months to prepare for that Florida State game, and they did that. Had all the incentive to play for to play this game down to the wire against Georgia on Saturday and deliver that effort. Like their third quarter, Alabama was just going backwards the entire time. Like I don't think they had a third down conversion in the third quarter. It was hard to watch, and I don't blame people that didn't want to watch any more of that.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a case to be made. Okay, I'm not talking about Blue Chips. I'm not talking about, oh, well, how could you
the
think
movie?
This?
Blue Chips, the movie? I love Blue Chips, the movie. Well, I watched it again. I watched it again over the summer. And is there a movie that's aged both better and worse at the same time than Blue Chips?
It's a piece of history. Like if you guys haven't seen Blue Chips in a minute, but yeah, that being said, like where it comes to the teams in the playoff, right? Don't talk to me about, oh, do you really think George, do you really think James Madison? Do you really think Tulane? In terms of when we have watched with our eyeballs these teams play football, I think that Oklahoma and Alabama are pretty clearly the most limited or flawed teams that are in the college football playoff currently. Now, does that mean that if one of them played James Madison or whatever, that they wouldn't blow them out? No. But when you watch them with your eyeballs, when you watch that Oklahoma team, coughing and farting everywhere against LSU, and that's a testament to how bad LSU is. That has nothing to do with Oklahoma, and all of their games have just been these slugfest, good and bad, right? Against good teams, against bad teams, the product looks the same on the field. So that being said, I think this is kind of a dream matchup for both of these head coaches, because for Kalen DeBoer, you think, surely we can't lose to this team 3 times. They haven't had a passing offense since we started playing them, and they've been beating us confidently. And if you're Oklahoma, you're like, this is why I still technically have a job. Like I've been able to beat Alabama. I've been able to play Kalen DeBoer. I've been able to show that I belong in the SEC. This is going to be such a great matchup.
Tell you what, Kalen DeBoer can tell me that Bama's getting healthier in all these key spots. Jam Miller, it sounded like he was out as more as a precaution. I can't really bank on Jam Miller being healthy anymore when he's been in and out of the lineup all year. And
but is Jam Miller that? I mean, so like, here's the real question: is because Bama was able to do like the cute 6-7 tweets when they were playing, Eastern Illinois and stuff. When
the answer is no. I know what you're about to ask, and the answer is no.
Right, like because does Jam Miller matter, or is he just masking the problem? It feels like he's masking the problem. Either you can run the ball and you can't. And it's a willingness. That's the thing. If you're scared to run the ball, if you're running all the trickeration, and we saw this exact thing with Texas and Athens, where it's like, we're scared to run the ball, so we're going to do all these weird swing passes and stuff like that. You could see in a team's like game plan and then how they carry themselves if they're ready to punch you in the mouth. And it feels like the Jam Miller thing is kind of a crutch at this point. I feel like you could give this team Derrick Henry and they wouldn't be willing to run the ball.
I know. And that's the issue. I mean, I looked at one point, because with Jam Miller out, their running back with the most forced missed tackles, I think, was Daniel Hill with 9. Like, in terms of the running backs available on Saturday. Like, buddy, I'm watching Nate Frazier have like 5 missed tackles forced in a given play. Like, they have no run game to speak of whatsoever. Before we get to the slugfest of Alabama and Oklahoma, in which Alabama is a very, very slight 1.5 point favorite according to FanDuel in the very early lines. We'll see if that stays. There is still going to be this bitterness about Bama in the field. It's the first 3-loss at-large team to make it into the field. And by the time that I let the dust settle and I was like, am I being emotional about this? Whatever. I would not have gone to bat saying that Alabama absolutely deserved to be in the field if they had been left out on Saturday. Now, I would have said at the same time, the selection committee, they're all over the place. They've never been more all over the place. To have the precedent with last year with SMU and then to not apply it to Bama this year, it wouldn't make sense. It would have been a weird hill to die on, even though these are different people in the room. They like to remind us of that, and there is still indeed a human element to it. But Bama is now in a spot where one of two things are going to happen, Will. And I tend to think it's more so, maybe I'm just out. Maybe I'm just out on Bama, and I'm a believer that Oklahoma's defense is not going to fix the issues of Alabama's offense. Just throwing that out there. One of two things will happen. One, Alabama is just going to get shredded in the first round by that Oklahoma defense. It's going to score 7 points in Norman. It's going to lose to Kalen DeBoer is going to lose to Brent Venables for the 3rd time, and people will go, man, I would much rather be watching Jeremiah Love in this Notre Dame offense right now. That's one thing that could happen. The alternative is that all of a sudden Bama is just like the best version of itself, and we're like, wait a minute, how in the world did this happen? Even though I do not believe a team that struggles to run the football as much as Bama does has true national championship upside, something that's very well documented. They're about to all of a sudden just go scorched earth on people, and then it's going to be like, wow, Maybe just by virtue of getting into the field, that's all this team needed. Or maybe Miami's going to end up being that team. I don't really know, but it feels like we're going down one of those two roads.
Yeah, and I mean, as we get more reps, absolutes become less true, right? And the thing that we said kind of earlier in the season, which is that you feel great about DeBoer in these situations, in these neutral site games. And my quote was, hey, good news, there are no unranked teams in the playoff, right? And you can't lose to the bad Oklahoma team last year, whatever. I wouldn't exactly say that the Oklahoma loss was the first case of that, because I just don't think that it was a level of like a Georgia game or even like a Tennessee game where there's like a rivalry element where DeBoer is going to be him, like this demon version of himself. That being said, this Georgia game is where that narrative dies. And so if you were a guy like me that was sitting there going, just get them in, they'll line it up, they'll figure it out. I mean,
the sweatshirt's dead too, Will. The black sweatshirt, it's kind of dead.
Yes, it's like we're heading again two realities. It's like, does this man have a magical Harry Potter style sweatshirt, or are the reps kind of been like a chance in some way?
It's an invisibility cloak, but yeah, I know what you're saying.
Right, exactly, yeah. And so it's like, he got this sweatshirt from Hagrid when he was at North Dakota or South Dakota, and it was like, okay, well, now you're the greatest college football coach in America, Harry. And so that being said, like, I don't think it's that simple, but I think that this ability to lock in, to flip the switch, as they often say, I think this was a great flip the switch moment where, and I love that you hit on that, where it goes, Alabama thought in their heart of hearts that they needed to win this game to get in, I think, and this was the most win and prove it situation I think they've seen under DeBoer, where it goes to, hey, your back is against the wall. You just had this Oklahoma loss. Yeah, you were predicted to be in, but you never know. You just can't get blown out here. And they did get blown out. So I don't know. I mean, maybe we're going to see them, go back to, oh my gosh, Ryan Williams is slicing everyone, the guy that was not super effective the other day. So
he looked good. He looked good on Saturday. Mm-hmm. Invisible in too many spots, but just in terms of like the yard after the catch, the way that he's able to make people miss, I actually think that was a slight win for Ryan Williams. It beat the alternative of him having like some one catch day with 2 targets or something like that. If you're looking for any sort of positive, it was that, and then Jeremy Bernard kind of waking up in the second half. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, right? Because it feels like these two passing offenses can be similar in that way, where you see like the Isaiah Satania play, several of them, right? I mean, even he had a couple, like they had these long plays in the Ole Miss game, even though they didn't end up winning that. That's how they generated their offense against LSU. Obviously, they had the busted coverage. So it's like both of these teams, Oklahoma and Alabama, are trying to play great defense, which I still think Alabama weirdly did. Like, I've never owed someone as much of an apology as Kane Womack, because the way that they were just getting beaten in on offense and just the defense was going back out there like, okay, well, we're on the 20 because we had punt blocked. All right, I guess we're going to have to do something here. So, yeah, I think that the Bama defense is fine, but I don't know.
Will, what do you think the over-under is for Bama, Oklahoma?
15.
It's a lot higher than I thought. I have this pulled up on FanDuel right now. Like I said, Bama's a 1.5 point favorite. First time ever that a road team will be favored in college football playoff. Because we've only had 1 year of home venues, but Bama's a 1.5 point favorite. Take a real guess at the over under.
I'm going to say, if you say it's a little bit high, I'm going to go 45.
It's 40.5. I think even that's
I would have guessed 43 before you said that was high. Because, yeah, we've seen these teams play. But you're right. Vegas is never wrong. And, again, all it takes is a chunk play here or there. It makes sense.
That's true. My gosh. This game is going to make me question if we were just watching offensive football stuck in the mud in the early 2010s, or if it was just like more of the same. Because it feels like we're heading down a very defensive struggle road in Norman for that matchup. So that's that we've talked enough about the like how this is going to set up for Bama, who now, oh, by the way, if Bama wins this game, or Oklahoma, whoever wins this game, just a little trip out to Pasadena, Rose Bowl, certain Indiana Hoosiers, first Big Ten championship since 1967. Not sure if we've said that yet. But yeah, weird for me to process that. And I had buddies that texted me like, oh man, tough draw for Indiana. Going, is it? Because I don't know, man. I think I'd rather have that draw and face the 8 or the 9 seed, one of those two teams, than facing Miami. I think A&M got a really tough draw. I think that's the game of round one. These other two games we'll get to as well, with Tulane and Ole Miss being the 6-11 matchup, a very ironic 6-11 matchup wherein these two teams already played in Oxford. Ole Miss won 45-10. They had like double the yards and all that stuff. And then James Madison obviously going up to Oregon. Oregon's a 20.5-point favorite for that one. But the Miami A&M matchup is like the clear most enjoyable viewing experience going into round one. And I said this on the pod the other day about how A&M being at that 7 spot as opposed to 6 is a major bummer for the Aggies, because I was fearing that whoever was going to get that 10 spot was all of a sudden going to be like, hey, we're playing with house money. And you could picture a world in which Miami, with their offensive line against an A&M defense that has struggled to stop the run, is all of a sudden in a really good spot. But it's Carson Beck, 108,000 people on the road. That's probably why A&M's a 3.5-point favorite.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to go back to one thing that you said really quick. I would think, talk about the great defenses in college football. Oklahoma's been there all year. Okay, Georgia, after what we saw on Saturday. Dude, after what I saw out of your Indiana Hoosiers, that's going to be another slogfest. I'm actually really excited to see whoever wins this game. It's just it's like they quarantined all the horrifying red teams in one quadrant of this, and they were just like, you know what? We can't have a slop fest in like a semifinal or whatever. We're going to have to put these teams together, hope that they just beat each other up, and then hope that we don't just have like a 10-3 championship game. But yeah, I'm actually so fascinated by, I would say, 2 of the top, at least 5, if not 3 defenses there in Oklahoma and Indiana. And the way that Indiana was able to play confidently too reminds me of like a souped up version of Oklahoma. Anyway, all that to say, A&M Miami. Yeah, I mean, I think that based on history, if you're A&M, like we talked about, man, like getting Miami at home in this late in the season, maybe they've already had all their fun. Maybe this was their end goal, was to get in and beat Notre Dame, and they've been thinking about that, or not beat Notre Dame because they already did that, but get ahead of Notre Dame, beat them in the rankings, as it were. And so I think that the Ohio State thing is where you start to say, all right, great season, guys. But I think Miami can certainly be had,
I always think there's an element of Mario Cristobal that's going to make me feel like close game. What's he going to do to mess this up? So that's going to be there. But yeah, A&M can now look at this matchup knowing this is going to be a dogfight. This is a team that can absolutely hang in the trenches. I think Carson
great
Beck
trench team, a team that has out-stupided themselves with Carson Beck, but it's underrated how even in these really gross games, like their trenches have not given up. And you could say some of the same things about A&M, but I would argue those trenches for A&M have faltered a little bit more than Miami's has.
Yeah, if you're like, you obviously need to be able to get home. That's huge. But if you're getting Malachi Tony in space, that's a different level. And A&M has been really good in those spots. But if you're Miami, are you just going to try and just say, we feel like we can run the football well against you. We want to take your crowd out of it. We want to kind of make this a boring type of game. And are they able to do that? I'm interested to see how healthy Marcel Reed is going to be for this matchup. But still, even though this is not a favorable matchup for A&M, this is still all you could have hoped for. And at some point, you're going to have to get through a team like Miami anyway. So I don't know. I kind of look at it from that standpoint. Is this should all still be kind of gravy from this point out for A&M. I think that Georgia, by staying at 3 instead of going up to 2, got the more favorable matchup than Ohio State. Because that 6-11 matchup now with Tulane going back to Ole Miss, a game in which both head coaches are off to their jobs, or at the very least, I mean, I know John Summerall is coaching in this game for Tulane, but not having Lane Kiffin. So in theory, if Ole Miss takes care of business and all of a sudden the flip doesn't script and Ole Miss wins when the spread is 16.5 points, then Georgia gets a rematch with a team that had already beat, a team that's not going to have its head coach, who has also never been in that spot. I would rather have that, I think, if I'm Georgia, than, wait for it, I'd rather have that than the ever juicy Carson Beck matchup. I think there's an element of Miami that kind of terrifies me. And maybe I'm just overhyping them and I'm looking a little bit too far into them getting in and them feeling like they're playing with house money, all the pressure's off. But do you think that's a fair take to have from Georgia staying at number 3?
I think you're totally right. And like that's another thing about the playoff committee is that, yeah, you could argue there's some hard, fast rules here. We talked about conference championships. Do they matter? Do they not? But it feels like the way they did some of these matchups was a little bit I hate to say petty, but it makes for good storylines, right? Where you get the Alabama Oklahoma rematch, you get the two kind of headless horseman teams with the future, Florida coach who's still there, the future LSU coach who was banned from the state of Mississippi. You get two different, takes on the same situation, and of course another rematch there, right? A Tulane team that was kind of roundly run out of the building, and that was something I was thinking about earlier today, where it's like, hey, I think it would be kind of a cheap way to view this game to say this is a Lane Kiffin game. Lane Kiffin was able to run them out of the building because at the time, man, this was a Tulane team that we as SEC fans had often just recently seen them, in that bowl game against Florida that wasn't great. And it kind of felt like this was a team that was losing some of its luster. I feel like the way that John Summerall and Tulane were able to lock in kind of in the home stretch of the season definitely made them a different team than what we saw initially in this matchup. And then at the same part of it, having a first-time head coach in the playoff, obviously something that's never been done before because the playoff is rather new, right? And so that being said, how is Pete Golding gonna handle it? I think Charlie Weiss is gonna be a huge deal. Like I really fully think like, okay, sending him over there was a way to do right by Ole Miss, even if people aren't viewing it that way. But I do think it was the right move because you don't want to just completely handicap your old team to figure out that side of the ball when you have a defensive head coach.
I also just realized that if Tulane does pull off the upset and wins at Ole Miss, Tulane would get to go to New Orleans, get a de facto home game against Georgia. How about that? I don't think that'll happen. Never say never. These are uncharted waters that we're dealing with right now. But I am at least looking forward to seeing how Ole Miss comes out. Like you can spin this as like an us against the world type deal. And I do think that's going to be fascinating to see play out. Any other playoff bracket thoughts? Do we feel like there's anything else that we looked at this besides just the Tuesday playoff show very likely going away if even Herb Street is coming out and speaking out against it? Is there anything else that we should take from how this field plays out? Do you want to you can do an early national championship pick if you want.
I think let's do a version of our thing from last year where we pick the games and then kind of make a bet of some kind on it. I think let's do it that way. I do need to dig into some of these teams because you guys know, how much JMU have you watched this year, y'all? You know what I'm saying? So I think we got to like really, like for me, I want to lock in and do a little bit more research. But yeah, that being said, we talked about Alabama, Oklahoma, talked about all these matchups. I think we should probably talk about Georgia a little bit more, and I think that was a dominant matchup. It is kind of a weird situation. They're going back to New Orleans after last year. I just feel like that fan base didn't have a great time in New Orleans last year. I think that was like a weird situation.
That's slotted though, the way that's set up with SEC champ going to the Sugar Bowl.
Oh, so even if they were the two, they would have been in the Sugar Bowl?
I believe so.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Because that's the way it played out last year. Georgia wins the SEC championship and then gets to go there, and that was why it was weird that Texas was the team that ended up in Georgia, but
True.
Texas didn't win the SEC championship, so it ended up in the Peach Bowl. And it's different with the way that's slotted this year. I should actually look into that and make sure that I'm not speaking out of my you-know-what with that.
Dude, they make it up as they go along, and then you hear it on air, and it's like, duh. And it's like, wait, this wasn't like this last. Hold on. And so,
yeah, I might have just made that up. We'll see if I'm right about that.
But they do such a great prep job on ESPN where it's like, oh yeah, dude, you guys remember this and this. So yeah, that being said, I'm going to be so tuned in to that Tulane Ole Miss matchup. Kind of like I said, I think that it's in one sense a hater's dream, and another sense you have to either root for John Summerall or Pete Golding. But I think that, again, like the Florida element of it is so fascinating here, and it's all narrative. Like our lives are all PR narrative, man. Like there's what we do, and then there's how it's viewed, and that kind of goes to this whole thing where it's so subjective, and it's so there is a hero and a villain in this whole coaching search situation. And again, how much patience will Florida have if, let's say, Tulane goes on to beat Ole Miss? Let's say they go on to beat Georgia.
It's no, you know what? No. I'm going to push back on that, and here's why. Because I've thought about this exact point. Because you can make that case if you're like competitive. Hey, we're in the thick of this. We're a team that's like, we don't want to watch like our rival team do this, and I guess John Summerall wouldn't be in that spot. I think it is such great PR if you're Florida ahead of the transfer portal window opening, January 2nd to January 15th, you get to say, watch that guy on a national stage. Watch John Summerall and his two get-back coaches. Watch that guy get livid for a team that he's leaving. Watch and see how much it matters to him. Transfers, you guys want to come play for this guy. I think as far as John Summerall can go, the better. Yes, he's going to have a lot of work to do for Florida. I want that guy to win as many games as possible. I want him getting as much big time experience on that stage. I'm not worried about the overall like year one of, and I get that year one is pressure packed because of the Scott Strickland element that we talked about. But I want that guy doing the best possible things for Tulane. Imagine if he gets to face multiple SEC teams, all of those things I think would work in their favor. So like I think if I'm a Florida fan, I want John Summerall to do the best possible things in the college football playoff.
Yeah, and to be clear, guys, I've said this over and over again. This is, again, hard to believe sometimes I'm this objective, but I think John Summerall's an awesome coach. I love the coordinator. Probably the best coordinator combo I think I've seen from a guy coming into a job like that. Dude from Georgia Tech and then Brad White.
Buster Falk, and then having Brad White as well. Not Brian Dable, as I had heard was rumored, but Buster Falk, I would argue, still a very splashy hire, a Broyles Award semifinalist.
Yeah, and a dude that, remember, we talked about, we wanted Key in Florida. You get a version of it. You get that with the defensive element, and I think that's just a great pairing. So I'm not here to be a hater, and I do align with your thinking there, which is that if you are Scott Strickland and some of your fan base just straight up does not know ball and thinks that John Summerall is some bum from the G5, watching him win a playoff game, that's a really good point, where if you're Scott Strickland, it's like, well, guys, I just hired a coach who his stock went up afterward, And so I think that's a great point. And then the other element I think that would be honestly more interesting is what if Ole Miss wins? And if you're Lane Kiffin, you're sitting there and you're getting dragged through the mud. You go, all right, Charlie, let's get back on that plane to Oxford, brother.
That's a good question. Is this a 1-game contract for Charlie Weiss Jr.? Is Lane say, hey, look, I know you just won. I know that's all well and good, but we kind of need you back in here to help me implement the offense. We're trying to get guys out of the portal. We're trying to get, our freshmen. We've got bowl practices that we're going to be going through. We've got like freshmen that we want to kind of get incorporated with you. Like, do you think you're done with that whole playoff thing? Like, hey, come on, it's Georgia. You saw what it looked like even with me. I mean, you guys don't have a chance of winning, without me. That'd be really funny. If Lane has any tiny little bridge left back to Oxford, which he probably doesn't, it's burned if he makes that call.
That's the real question, is who is Lane Kiffin rooting for in this game? Because this is a guy who is on social media maybe more than me. Like, put on his Twitter notifications if you haven't. He's hilarious and a little bit, petty sometimes. But that being said, think about his perspective, right? Which is that everybody in Oxford is saying Pete Golding was the heart and soul of this team. Lane Kiffin was just the face. If he comes in and wins a playoff game before Lane Kiffin was obviously able to, because you could credit Lane Kiffin for making the playoff. You can't credit him for a win if he's not on the field. And
no, he doesn't get that win. No way does Lane Kiffin get. I don't want to see that on his Wikipedia page.
Heck
I don't want. No way.
I think because they played 0 games without him, like I said, I think it's fair to give him an appearance. But then on the other side of the aisle, because Lane Kiffin is a guy who does, I think, read some press clippings, and you've seen a lot of the Florida stuff, or a lot of the other ADs say, hey, we kind of didn't want the Lane Kiffin mess. We were more into John Summerall. John Summerall is a little bit more professional. He's this type of thing. If he comes out and also wins a playoff game at Tulane before Lane Kiffin, then it sets up Lane Kiffin for people to be like, well, you guys could have had Summerall, I guess, technically, and he won a playoff game. What's Lane Kiffin won? Question mark.
Alternatively, if Ole Miss is in a dogfight against Tulane, that's going to boost Lane's ego so much.
Oh, dude, get those Twitter notifications on, because from his standpoint, he did beat Tulane. That's another thing. You could credit him with a win over Tulane as well. Yep. And so if he's just sitting there going, wouldn't have called that there, ... that would be... And get ready, because he said some wild stuff this week on Twitter.
And didn't appear on College Game Day. I'm sure that was just a result of trying to lock down Blake Baker and trying to get his recruiting class, and no other reason about like the questions that he was going to be asked or anything like that. No. Lane would never do that.
Maybe he is 2-0 versus Tulane. Anyway.
This is true. Scariest team in the college football playoff field. Is Georgia the answer to that question?
So I think it's two different questions. I think like who is your pick or who is your favorite? I think Georgia's shown enough to where they're just a wagon. To me, the term scariest is for more of a team like like an Oregon or like maybe an A&M, where it's like, oh, you're mad, you're on the one line, or you're hosting a playoff, you can make some noise and upset one of those bigger teams. Does that make sense?
True. Yeah. I think Oregon. I had predicted in the preseason that Oregon would make it to a national championship. I'm now looking at that matchup with Tech in the quarterfinal. I should say Texas Tech, if Georgia fans hear Tech and they think Georgia Tech. Who wants to play Texas Tech right now? Who wants to play Texas Tech? If we're going to have a conversation about who's the scariest team in the playoff, I realize they do not have the experience. But there are people yesterday, I hope, who watched Texas Tech and who watched Indiana and thought, whatever preconceived notions I have about these teams, I need to be gone with them because they're done. They're dead. These
guys,
two teams
take
are
off
terrifying.
The SEC Homer hat and look at what Indiana did. Scary. Look at what Texas Tech did. Scary. Now, who's not scared of Texas Tech? 3 Adderall, Dan Lanning, probably. I think that guy would fight a bull with no weapons. I think that he's not scared of anything.
That'd be a great matchup. That'd be so good if we get that.
The most fearless team. And again, like, it's one thing to lose your head coach, lose your whatever, be moving on. Like, that's more of about we have nothing to lose. Dan Lanning is like, I would line up at center for my team tomorrow. So I think that matchup, again, could be favorable because we might see the blue chips come out against Oregon. We sure did last year against Ohio State. That's the thing. We saw 2 teams with Oregon and Ohio State where you thought they were on equal playing field until the ball got snapped and Ohio State had 5 stars and Oregon had some dudes that thought they were 5 stars.
This is true. And that was unbelievably lopsided. Yeah, I'll be interested to see if the tweaking of the first round buys, if that makes a difference. I think it will with how this is. Last year, it just didn't feel like the seedings 1 through 12 was indicative of the strength of these teams, and Ohio State being a big part of that. But like, I think this year it's going to be a little bit more favorable with that, where, man, if one of those top 4 teams is losing in a quarterfinal, it's going to take a whale of an effort, like a true whale of an effort to be able to do it. And I'm not even out on Ohio State. Maybe Ohio State's the scariest team. Maybe Ohio State is sitting there. Ryan Day is going, if you remember last year, lost a late season game. We turned it around. Everything was just fine. I do think if I'm Ohio State, though, I like going into that Indiana game. I told, like, my mom was texting me. I was getting texts from people like left and right, like in the second half of that game. I said, Mom, if it's close, I use winning this game. Ohio State hadn't played in a 1-score game in the fourth quarter since September. It had been forever. And I just think there's something 2018 Alabama that's just a lesson to learn with playing in those close games and what it looks like when, it's NUT crunching time late and you're inside the 10-yard line and you somehow can't score. I just think that Ohio State could end up being one of those scary teams. We basically now said that any team could be scary. The playoff's a scary place. It's a scary place.
Yeah, I'm going to stick with Biden. I mean, exactly. Yeah, I'm sure Chris Ignetti is like showing up at guys like midterms and like blasting Mo Bamba at a speaker, like 1-score game. What are you going to do? Because that guy is a psycho. Like, I could not be more impressed with Indiana. And see, I didn't text you because I know you'd be like, oh, I don't know, same old Hoosiers. And so if you finally start drinking the Kool-Aid, I'm excited for you.
I'm happy. I'm happy for my school. I'm very happy for my school. Do we want to, let's share. Okay. So before we get to this, we'll close with a couple of Heisman thoughts that I have, as I sit here and finalize my decision that I'll probably lock in the ballot sometime in the next few hours here. But my mess of a day was in some ways, Indiana fed to some of that angst, but it wasn't Indiana's fault. I promise. So I got to Atlanta yesterday and got to hang out with my guys Candler and Perry and had a great time being able to see them beforehand. Got to meet Perry's girlfriend who you met at the tailgate, and it was great.
And lads, I wish I was there. I just had some stuff with the credentials, had an event today, so I was like, you know what? I'm not going to kill myself to go, hang.
Speaking of stuff with credentials, Will. So get to the credential will call, media will call, and I've been covering this event since 2018. Covered plenty of events, have never had an issue with like a credential process ever. And I get there, give me your name, give me your ID. We don't have a credential for you. Okay. Heart sinks. That's not good. Why have I been getting every email related to this game? I guess I never officially got like your credential has been accepted email. And maybe I should have, but I also remembered last year, I didn't get that either. And then I sent an email to the SEC communications director and he said, no, you're fine. You're on the list. What are you talking about? I was like, okay, maybe it's just that happening all over again. It was not. So apparently I went through the credential process and it never finalized. I never saw anything that said that it didn't finalize. I've never had that happen to me before. Still don't even fully know. It was an interesting
process this year. I think to play devil's advocate, they had a lot of teams that didn't know. Let me quickly ask you this question, just from like kind of a straw poll. Any Texas or A&M media there?
No, no, none of that. No.
So that's
no, or no Ole Miss. No, Texas has been out for a bit.
No, I know, but like that's what we thought might have happened. That a lot of guys applied because their team was in and they got approved early and they didn't really know what to do. And maybe some guys would have showed up. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was last year was a super smooth process versus this year. It feels.
Yeah, so get to the gate and stuff, and obviously my heart sinks. I'm like, am I going to get denied for a game that I just like flew in to be able to cover? And just my mind is kind of spinning. But thankfully, like I at least knew the SEC communications member who was there, like on site, and he like was like, yeah, we don't have a credential for you. I can tell you what happened because this also happened to me when I tested out the system. And I was like, okay, he at least sees some grace in that. And I'm Saturday down south. We're not just going to sit there and get denied. Like I'd like to think our name is big enough to where that's not going to happen. And they actually, know what we do in terms of covering this conference very well, in my opinion, very biased opinion. But he's able to, long story short, I had to like reapply like while I was sitting there to get a credential. They literally made a credential for me. And then, so I'm relieved that they're able to do that. It took like 15, 20 minutes awkwardly standing there, which that's not a great feeling. So I get up there and then I have the realization, okay, it's great that I just got a credential. I don't have a seat. So then I have to message him again and be like, hey, is there anything we can do? Is there anything you can do for me? Kind of figure this out. Because it's not like I could just like go hang out on the field. You have to leave the field a half hour before the start of the game. He's able to get me a media member that wasn't able to make the trip. I'll leave that media member nameless. It's friend of the show. But it's irrelevant like why they weren't there. But they basically just like weren't able to make the trip. So I was able to take their spot. So that ended up working out just fine. Everything like with the game itself was everybody saw it on TV. You don't need me to rehash that. Anyways, so I finished.
And Connor had more rushing yards in Alabama when he got there. So he did his job.
And when I left. So I leave after, writing the game column. I do like every year I do predicting what the top 12 of the college football playoff will look like. So I had that column basically like written by the time that I left Mercedes-Benz and I was going to be going to the hotel. Hotel was like a mile and a half away from Mercedes-Benz, still in downtown. Get to the hotel. Waiting in line behind like 3 or 4 people. Finally get to the front of the line. It's about like 10 o'clock at this point. I had timed it to where I left in the middle of the second quarter of the Big Ten Championship, hoping that I would just be checking in during halftime of this game. Get to the check-in line. They're like, hey, you don't have a reservation number. I'm like, all right, we booked through a third party with our company. It's like a third party system that we have to use for all of our travel stuff. People don't care about that. They're like, we don't have a reservation number. I'm like, yeah, but you have my last name. If I booked this, you should have my last name. You should have a reservation. I have like all this other information that goes into it. Like, can you help me out? They're like, no.
Good to see you, Will Ogburn. Uh-oh.
Yeah. Right. So they're like, I said, you were supposed to send me an email with the reservation number and you just never sent it. They're like, yeah, but I can't do anything for you without the reservation number. Like, they told me I need to get the third party on the phone to be able to take care of this. This is now 10:30 at night on a Saturday night, wherein I had to call the third party emergency, support for our company to be able to figure out this hotel situation. Puts me on hold for 20 minutes as I'm sitting there in the lobby of this hotel. The Indiana game is well underway in the second half. All this is going on. I'm getting texts left and right from family members, from friends. Oh my God, did you see that touchdown? Blah, blah, blah. When you're getting like 10 different people that are texting you about like live updates for a game and you're dealing with this, very stressful. So all this is happening.
I know you because you were content capturing Connor when you were going through the first. When you sent me a bunch of videos, I was like, this man's done his job. I'm going to leave him alone.
So I'm going through this process and I finally like, they say, hey, this is on the hotel. The hotel never sent us a reservation number. Like you booked this 3 weeks ago. It's on them. So they're like, let me talk to the concierge. Finally get up to the front of the line after like waiting in line again. And it's backed up, it's SC championship in town. There's a bunch of fans, whatever. I finally get it to her. She's like, there's nothing I can do for you. We don't have any rooms available and we never gave you a reservation number. I'm blown away because I've never had this experience before wherein you book a room 3 weeks ago through a third party and they're like, well, we never gave you a reservation number, so you never had the room booked. You weren't going to give me the reservation number until the day before. So that's not how this works. That's not how this works at all. They overbooked the room. They overbooked the room and didn't have the process to be able to figure out that they themselves had overbooked and that they had not been able to give me a room. So as this is all happening and like the concierge is on the phone with the third party travel people, I've got drunk, obnoxious Georgia fans. Yep. Sorry, Georgia fans.
I've heard there's nothing finer in the land, Connor.
Nothing finer, many will say.
Not on this day when your team is the biggest game of their history and you don't have a hotel room.
Shout out to Emery, Nothing Finer pod. They multiple times bump into me. If you're that loud, I understand. You've been out. You've had a good time. You're at an SEC championship. You're having a great time. Even though I'm on speaker, literally fighting for my life, fighting for a bed to sleep in this evening, and you clearly have no sense of the moment. All right, I'll give you a little bit of grace there. But when you bump me twice, it's the closest I've come to turn around and swing it on someone in public, Will. And I didn't want to do that. And I didn't. But I pointed and I said, don't do that again or else. And I stopped and I stared and I turned around and then I realized my problem was still there and it wasn't going to be fixed even if I had just let out all my rage. And I basically in this moment had to book another hotel at 11 o'clock. I had to, on top of that, I had to call the third party again to get them to cancel my current reservation, call my my supervisor at SES, who's Adam Spencer, who's just happened to be up at 11 o'clock because he's watching the conference championships. Very grateful he was because he has to approve it. Then I have to find another hotel. I have to call the hotel to make sure that it's not going to be the same exact problem that I just ran into. All this is happening at like 11, 11:15, blah, blah, blah. By the time I get into an Uber, get over to the hotel, finally get checked in, the game is over. I did not see the second half of this football game. This football game in which my alma mater clinched its first Big Ten championship since 1967, the Lyndon Baines Johnson administration, Will. And I had no sort of like actual live account of this going on. I'm going to have to rewatch this game, obviously, which I will. No, all this is happening, and I'm just like, get me to a freaking bed now. It was a rough day for your boy.
I'm so sorry. I'm glad I didn't see you on Twitter decking some random Georgia fan. It would have been you versus like
that would have been a tough look. I admittedly, that would have been emotions getting the best of me.
The pop up just hello, welcome to the Saturday Down South podcast. I'm Ab Spencer and I'm Will Ogridge. We're going to talk about playoff Connor's in jail. That would have been terrible. But yeah, man. I mean, I'll say this to you on air. If you're ever in that situation again, hit up me and John. You can crash at our place, man. We weren't even there.
I know, and I had a moment where I was like, if I get denied, if they tell me I don't have a room, which I also told them, you know this is on you, I'm going to give them the nastiest 1-star review. I don't think I've ever given a 1-star review. I think it's an appropriate time. I think it's an appropriate time for my first 1-star review of someplace ever because it was entirely on them. And I won't name them, Staybridge Suites, but they screwed me over in the worst possible way. And it was a nightmare scenario. And it's time that I'm never going to get back. I'm never going to get to those moments back where I've got like, you know, my best buddies and my cousin, my aunt, my mom and my brother and like all these people in my life. And even the Georgia fans, the non-drunk, obnoxious ones, texting me about this as this is happening in real time. And Indiana is about to beat Ohio State for a Big Ten championship. And I'm sitting there just going, I need a reservation number. Not my favorite experience in this life. I'm grateful, so grateful that I get to do this for a living, and I promise I never take that for granted. But that was about the only time in my life where I thought, God, let me be doing anything else but this.
Yeah, that's and like we would both agree that like one of the more like elitist or annoying things on Twitter is like the big journos talking about their Marriott points and stuff. But this is like a Larry David Curb Your Enthusiasm situation where like for the first time that you touched down, it's like
I've never had it happen. I've never had it happen at a credential place. I've never had it happen at a hotel, and it happened on the same day as Indiana was winning a Big Ten championship.
It's like how with Texas A&M, they bear the pain of their football team from the sidelines. Maybe that was you with Indiana. Maybe you had to suffer so they could succeed, and maybe you couldn't watch them succeed. Maybe that's what it was.
Maybe. Oh, that's a good spin zone. I like that. I'm going with that. I'm stealing that. In the words of Jeremy Jam, I'm stealing that. That's mine now. There is definitely a look. I will not be bitter. I will not be bitter. Ultimately, I did get to sleep. I got my 5 hours of sleep that I usually get on a Saturday night, hopped on a plane, flew back home, was able to watch the selection show in all of its glory on Saturday. So I'm grateful for that and was able to hop on a pod with you, write another column. So I'm grateful that it played out the way that it did. But it was, how I said last Sunday, I was just too overstimulated. I think I was overstimulated on Saturday as this was happening.
Well, and that just goes to show the amount of, love and respect I have for you because I'm realizing there are about 4 or 5 people on Earth that I would prefer to not see a Twitter video of them beating someone up online. And, just the quote tweet, Indiana 2-0 today. Like I would be worried about you. I wouldn't be making jokes. I would be. So I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're facing the place, feet in the seat. And it all worked out in the end, so that's good.
I can say this now in confidence. This is the trust tree, right? I can say this. I wouldn't have won that fight. I wouldn't have won that fight, man. I would have. It would have just been a really scrappy first punch, and then it would have been downhill, and I would have just been.
There was probably a pack of dogs out there too. It probably would have been a little outnumbered. So, but yeah, like I said, I'm glad you made it, man. And that's what an incredible end of this season.
Let's just say if this were youth football, we would be playing in different leagues with the competition that I was sizing up in this moment of angst that I had. But anyways, so all this was happening, and I'm gonna rewatch the end of this game and figure out Fernando Mendoza, Heisman possibilities. Odds makers certainly think that he is in line to win it. FanDuel right now has him at minus 3,000. Diego Pavia at plus 1,400. I think actually the spot for number 3 is going to be really interesting too, because I would guess if I'm just sitting here predicting, that's going to be your 1 and 2 in some order. And then number 3, how that's going to play out is going to be fascinating. I think the Jacob Rodriguez case is really interesting. Jeremiah Love. Oh, hey, Notre Dame, you didn't get into the college football playoff, but at least you got your guy to New York. Like maybe there's going to be some of that. I don't know. I don't know how this is all going to play out. I'm not to go full Lane Kiffin, but I haven't even decided officially what I'm doing yet. So yeah, Heisman.
Yeah, and Heisman's one of the few where it's like it truly is your opinion is much more weighted than mine because you have a vote and I don't. So I don't even want to like push. What do you think about this guy? Because it is like it's a process that you take very seriously and that we've talked about. Like I kind of wish more people would. And so yeah, I think let me ask you this question. We saw our guy Pavia head into the fight last night. What do you think about Pavia, man?
You know what I think of Pavia. You know that I have sung his praises, and there are going to be moments. I don't know if it's 3 years from now, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, whenever he graduates and whenever he moves on to his post Vandy life. I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to know when that is. I will have Saturdays in which I think to myself, man, I would love to watch Diego Pavia right now instead of whatever I just watched for the last 3.5 hours. Again, not to do the bitter journalism things. I am trying to be as present as possible with Diego Pavia. And even though I acknowledge the fact that he is not going to be playing for a national championship, I don't think that's the Vanderbilt standard. And I think if that's your argument against him, I think you need a better argument. I really do. So
Jeremiah Love can't come either. You know what? I'll get you. This could be a little bit on the spot, so forgive me, but I feel like you've written a lot of articles about this stuff. Just the SEC. If you had to name a Heisman of just the SEC, who are your invitees and who would you go with there?
Oh, that's a good question. Just the SEC. Pavia is the obvious one. You have to include him. I would probably still include the 3 quarterbacks that will be in the college football playoff. I would still go Gunnar Stockton, Trinidad Chambliss, Marcel Reed. Now, Marcel Reed getting hurt the way that he did, like if you're having a true, Heisman arc, whatever you want to call that, like he's not going to be in contention for that. But like the things that Trinidad Chambliss has done this year in that Ole Miss offense, second to none. I'll be interested to see if he finishes top 10. I think Gunnar Stockton might finish top 10 as well. I think he'd certainly be worthy, but I would probably say those guys have a bit of an edge. If there's anybody else to include in that conversation, it's Ahmad Hardy. But Kewan Lacey, man.
I was about to say, I'm not exactly sure that I would take Chambliss out of the Ole Miss team because Lacey's scary. Not that Chambliss hadn't been. I'm not taking it away from Chambliss, but in terms of a difference maker to his peers, I think Hardy's that guy, but we talked about it. It's just no strength of record there. There are too many losses. That Lacey dude's nice, man.
He is nice. And be interested to see what this new offensive staff does with him and what all that looks like. Not to just turn the page because he still has football to play this year. But yeah, that's probably how it would shake out. I just realized I gave you 6 names. And for those wondering, like,
I was like, what is this? But we're making it up. Who cares? We could have as many people in made up Nashville, not New York. That's where we do our SEC Heisman.
Yeah. Can I get Mansour Delane in there as
I'm
part of that?
I'm just giving Connor a column idea. I see the wheels turning.
There we go. That's good.
Here's the musical guest. Here's doing the picks.
Yeah. Cannot release Heisman ballot until after the ceremony on Saturday. Like we literally sign NDAs. Like we will not release all that. But if you're burnt out on the Heisman process, which I know I vented against in previous years, and then I got a vote, and then I just became a sheep. But if you are frustrated with the way that it's played out in years past, the Heisman balloting did not even open. You could not vote on it until late yesterday afternoon. So it was right before the Dr. Pepper challenge. Again, I wish I tweeted this out. I kind of would like to see him wait till after that. Let me see the talent that I'm working with. Big Ten also does the Dr. Pepper challenge. People forget that. But see the kind of arms that we're talking about here would be nice. So look, I don't think I made my decision just off of that. I still don't have my decision officially made. I'm probably going to go back and forth over the course of the next 5 hours.
Well, just let Marty Smith know ahead of time, please.
We'll get Marty. Next time we get Marty on the pod, I'm just going to say thank you for your service. Thank you for all that you do. But maybe, just maybe, next time you give Lane the ultimatum. What if Marty had done that and just totally flipped the script on Lane and said, you see these ESPN cameras? You see this van that I showed up in here, the conversion van, whatever this is? We're gone if you don't make up your mind in the next hour. Good luck. Enjoy it. All right, well, that's a pod. That'll do it. We have so much to talk about on Wednesday. We're going to get into some of these assistant hires. We've got Zach Arnett coming back to be the Mississippi State defensive coordinator. I don't know that we're going to get into that this pod. But I talked to some people about that on Saturday as well that made me think, God, I love that this is happening. I just love that Zach Arnett's coming back to Mississippi State. So we're going to have a lot of things related to that. The Heisman finalists will be announced on Monday night. So we will, I'm sure, have some sort of recap there, maybe some playoff cleanup stuff. Maybe some people are going to say some really stupid things that we're going to want to dig into. I don't know. There's a lot going on in college football. We'll get into all of it on Wednesday. If you haven't, please leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch every episode of the Saturday Down South podcast. Follow us on Twitter at the STS Pod, at Set Down South, at CJ O'Gara, at Gus Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.